Hey everybody, Bobby Chu here, and I just want to welcome you to this workshop, The Art of Creature Illustration. Okay, now wildlife in general, I love, and creatures in particular have always fascinated me. How an animal moves, fights, survives, all play vital roles in its ultimate design. For example, if the animal climbs up a tree, it probably has claws. If it bites, if it eats vegetation, it will have certain kinds of teeth. For example, this is important because, as with all fictional animals, the biggest obstacle your creature must overcome is disbelief, since it is fictional. When I come up with creature designs for films, it is extremely important for me to think about the story and the feeling I want the audience to have when they're looking at the creature. It has to be believable, it has to be interesting. Okay, one of the best signs of a great creature design is when people say, I would love to see one of these things in person. Think about how memorable your creature is. If it looks like a million other things you've seen, okay, nobody's going to remember it. In this tutorial, I'll take you through the twists and turns I took to create this painting, Early Bloom. I hope my process will help steer you towards the right kinds of questions to ask yourself when designing your own creations. Okay, when going through this tutorial, keep in mind that I did not come up with this image alone. I had to work with a client. I had to work with the art editor, Paul at ImagineFX, who art directed me. So I will also talk in this tutorial about revisions or problems Paul saw in the piece and how we work together to solve them. Part of doing good work in the commercial art industry is finding good creative people to work with. So the first thing I want to start off with is the actual idea of the creature. The idea of the creature is something that needs to be so interesting that if you were impartial to this painting, if you were impartial to the making of whatever it is that you're painting, and you saw it on the internet just cruising around, what you want to do is, when you look at it, not only do you think it's a great painting and a great idea, but you would want to even tell a friend. And that's my goal all the time, to be able to get something as interesting as that. That way it will be memorable. So I think about the whole entire story of the creature, not just how it looks, should it have stripes or spots and things like this, but why? What is the story behind the creature? Okay, so in painting Early Bloom, this is my story of the creature here, which I call a blossoming dissimulate. Okay, so once every 10 years, before the magenta flowers of the rudderless tree fully bloom, which is the tree that this creature is in, you can see that it has these little flowery buds here. Um, Before the flowers fully bloom, the blossoming dissimulate will come out of its nest inside the tree to feed. And the bright magenta hairs on its antlers resemble the flowers on the tree and attract a huge array of little creatures from the forest. This 1 week of feeding will sustain the dissimulate as it hibernates until the next rudderless blossom. And that's the story behind this. So it's saying that this is a very rare creature, and the way that it catches its prey is very interesting. Well, to me, it's very interesting, and hopefully to you as well. Now, the next part is this. Uh, Now, the next part after this is the actual logic behind the idea. Okay, the blossoming dissimilic means the blossoming disguise. The idea behind early bloom is that there is a predator with colorful antlers that resemble flowers of the tree it lives in. Because the tree has not yet bloomed, all the little creatures are attracted to the colorful antlers. We can see similarity in our world as well, with predatory tactics in things that exist in our own wildlife. For example, like the anglerfish, how it has a glowing little kind of like a fishing rod in front of its face that attracts little fish to the front of its face. This particular painting would be the moment before the predator attacks and feeds on the next group of little creatures that have gathered near its head. Now the first step is the initial sketch. After you have your great idea, whatever it is, you start off with the initial sketch. Now this sketch was, the original sketch is very, very small. It's maybe an inch by 3/4 of an inch, something like that. It's very, very small. The initial sketch is a thumbnail that I'll do just for myself. It's not something I would plan on handing in, so I keep it scratchy and keep it small, and that way I can sketch the ideas out very quickly, one after the other. When the drawing is so small, it's easier to concentrate on the feeling of the entire image without being sucked into certain sections of your painting that don't need as much attention. Okay, at this point, you just want to concentrate on the overall painting. So when I was sketching this initial sketch here, what it really looked like was probably something more along the lines of something like this. Of course, everybody's monitors are very different, and your monitor might be a lot bigger. Then in that case, maybe the sketch looked something more like this size. Either way, it was very, very small. And at this point, you don't have to have a fully thought out idea, okay? So let me explain the idea behind this sketch. At this point, I might not totally know what the blossoming dissimilic will look like. So instead, I drew down this little shape right here of just the general kind of shape of the creature and a bunch of little creatures on its back. And the whole entire idea is that they are there. Let me zoom this in a little bit. These little creatures are here because they're attracted to the head of this creature. That's the idea. Very simple, very straightforward. And this is how it develops, because as you're doing your sketch for yourself, I start to think about, okay, well, what do I need to do to get this understandable enough to be able to hand in? Okay, to submit a sketch is to submit an idea. You really want to make sure that most of the most important points of the idea can be communicated quickly and clearly. The main things I want to show you are the image's general composition and the story idea that little prey creatures are being attracted to the colorful antlers. What kind of creatures will they be? Well, we'll figure that out later. Those details are less important at the moment. Okay, so from here, what I did was I put a little tone on there. You can start to see some little branches in the background. Very, very simple. One tone with semi-opaque paint. And then I took it down to this. This is two different tones at this point. Let me bring in my layers menu right here. You can see that it's just all in this one layer right there. And even though I move the creature down and the little prey creatures are scattered about. It still is very similar to the initial sketchy idea. At this point, I can take the painting a bit further, right? Because now that I have the idea, I can really clarify it to the point where somebody that isn't myself would still be able to understand this thing. Okay? So at this point, I added in a little bit of color before I actually handed it in. This is how I handed in the very first sketch. Very loose. I like to paint actually quite small. I painted in this size, okay? And this is the size of the file that I handed in. It wasn't a big file. I don't want the editor to be influenced anyway by small details at this point. So I want to keep the painting nice and small, and that way he can only look at the broader details, the things that I'm trying to tell him. Now, with this painting, you can see that I have a monochromatic, a gray background, right? And then I added in some color, some reds. Okay, I added in some color, these reds to the antlers, and some reds to the animals. And then I explain in my email that the red just symbolizes colorful things. Okay, so everything else is not going to be as colorful as these creatures and the antlers. Why? Because part of the story is that this blossoming Dissimilic is camouflaged amongst its environment. Okay, part of when we create paintings, we're telling a story, and if it's just one painting, you want to know where the beginning of your story is, where the middle, and where the end is. In other words, you want to know where the audience is going to start off. And where I want them to start off is in the antlers and the creatures that are looking at the antlers, and then the creature itself, the big creature itself. Okay? Okay, so once I handed in the sketch, after a few days, they review the sketch, they come back with revisions and suggestions and how to go further. So at this point, before progressing the idea even further, I communicated with Paul, the art editor, and got his feedback on how the piece is going. He tells me he wants more prey and more interesting eyes in the Dissimilic creature. So I took those notes down. He also suggested a color theme. He wanted it green in the background and this very interesting grayish thing for the tree and for the creature, for the blossoming Dissimilic creature. Many of the ideas he conveys are things that I had planned on introducing in the next stage of developing my idea. So it was simply a matter of showing Paul my work in progress before going further with it. He also mentioned that the type, which he would give me something like this, a template to go by. He also mentioned that the type can also, some parts can be behind certain elements of the the painting. So it gives me something to think about. Where can I have things kind of overlapping, elements of the text and things like that on the cover might be pretty interesting. So I kept that in mind. Now, I have my notes, so what I did from this point, what I usually do from this point is I usually Let's make a new layer. Okay, and let's make, say, like an adjustment layer. Now what I want to do with this layer is just tone down the amount of contrast there is. Okay, I could do that by using these sliders right here. So I'm saying with this adjustment layer, which is a levels adjustment layer, and I just click over here, I go to levels, and then it brings out this. With this levels adjustment layer, maximum brightness right now is white. It can go up to white. Okay, if I want to take down the maximum brightness to something like this, this is more like 20% gray, and maximum darkness, I want to take that down to something like this. This is how I do it. And this way I can turn down the contrast. Now, you can see that there's also a layer there, so I'm going to put my adjustment layer above this folder. Okay, so now it's taken away a lot of the contrast. We've merged a lot of these values closer and closer together. Now, what is the reason behind this? It's because when you have a painting that's really worked in, where it goes from light to dark and has a lot of different values, it gets harder to actually paint on top of it and develop it further. For me anyways. So what I like to do is I like to turn down the contrast. Right? I like to turn down the contrast so that I can work the painting in more detail. So I'll show you what I mean by that. So instead of perhaps a circular eye like this, I could give it a bit more detail. Okay, I could really work in. I could work with the original sketch and at the same time develop it further, right? So in this mouth, where would the darkest shadow be? Would there be teeth? How does this nose work? Things like this. What I also like to do is, okay, so if you go up to Window, Arrange, New Window, then you can open up a secondary window, and we could put that in the corner, just like that. This way I can see my entire painting and where is it developing from here. Okay, so I'm just going to add in some contrast. I'm going to look over here, I'm going to look over here. Both windows are very important. If you've ever seen any of my other workshops or taken my digital painting class on schoolism.com, you would know that the smaller window that I opened up is actually more important than the larger window for me. The smaller window, to me, that represents whether or not my painting works as a whole, or does it just have some cool parts in it, but it doesn't work as a whole. The painting must look good in the smaller window. Okay, so from this point I can add in some values. This is how it was before, right? Here's how it is after. So it's starting to develop. Adding in shadows and things like that. Now I was also given a overall color scheme, so that would be something that I'd want to show them at the next stage as well. How I like to usually work, especially on concepts or illustrations that might go through a lot of different revisions, what I like to do is start off not really talking about colors just yet. Even though I did put some reds into this painting before I handed it in, it wasn't saying that these things have to be red, right? I made sure to write an explanation in my email when I handed it in to say that the red represents vibrant colors. And that's actually quite important because if they don't even like the idea first, when you get into color, well, first that's probably going to spend or take up more of your time, but also then they might start talking about color as well before the idea is completely refined, and then you might have a little bit too much back and forth. Sometimes that will happen because they're just talking about everything. They're talking about too many things all at once. They're talking about the color, the idea, the composition, the different elements in your painting, and all these different things. And that might just lead you down the wrong path and have your assignment take up way too much time. So what I like to do is I just like to concentrate on the painting first, the idea of the painting first, I should say, before I move into color. Okay, so you can see that this painting is starting to develop quite quickly just by adding in some shadows here. And you know, if you ever taken my digital painting classes or anything like that, you would know that I like to go back and forth. I like to go back and forth between light and dark, and slowly work my way to the ends of the spectrum, to the ends of the grayscale, at least. Right? So put in some nice values here. Okay. That's looking pretty good. Now we can bring in the lighter values. I put in the darker values. I'm going to bring in the lighter values. Now notice before I went to my color picker right here, I dropped the light tone right here. Why is that? Because I want to see what color am I painting on top of or close to. You know, I want something that isn't going to be too bright, and this is a great way of being able to pick good colors by having the color that you're going to be painting close to right underneath. Okay, and you could do this on the same layer if you like, or if you want to be a little bit more cautious, you can do this on a separate layer. Okay, and with this light tone, I'm going to bring out even more elements. Again, here's how it was before, like this. Okay, here it is now. So you can start to see the face is being developed a lot more. You can see that certain shadows are being put in, like by the arm right here, by this leg right here, that weren't there before. And you're really just adding on to the original sketch. Now the most important thing about this step here is that you don't just paint on top of the exact parts that you painted previously. So for example, if this is one tone right now, I don't want to put on a light tone that just goes over that exact area there. I want to add more information, more details. I want to break things up a bit more. So I might take this big area right here and only put in some light tones right on the top here, right? And not on the bottom. That way you're starting to vary up that section even more, and you're progressing the image further. Okay, so there we go. It's adding in a bunch of tones right there. Bring up this creature into the light. Do the same for these branches right here. Okay, just putting in some additional details and values. Could add a bit more details to these creatures here, but at this point I don't even really care too much about the creatures, these secondary creatures. I'm more concerned about the main creature and making sure that this creature is developed right. So here we go. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. I feel like overall the creature's head is a bit too bright, so let me just tone that down a bit. And let me brighten up right underneath here, because the idea is that the belly, the fur on the belly and the fur underneath the nose area here, it's quite light. Okay, there we go. Okay, and after we have this a little bit more developed, then we can add on some color. Now how I go about doing that is usually I'll just make a layer, okay, and set it to color. And what this does is whatever I paint in this layer, whatever color I use, it will not take the value of the color, like how dark it is or how light it is, but only the hue, okay, which is this, and the amount of saturation. Okay, and then you could paint on top, and it transfers only the hue and only the saturation. Now, if you're painting multiple elements and you really want to be able to adjust all these different things, instead of making one layer set to color, even better, you grab a whole entire folder, you make a whole entire folder, you set that to color, and you put uh, layers, normal layers, inside your folder that's set to color. Okay, this way you can keep all your different colors all separate, all the different elements, all the colors of every different element separate. Okay, now say I didn't want to paint on top of these guys, I can make a new layer and I drag that layer underneath the layer that I just painted in. And this one, I could just fill the whole entire thing in. And it won't cover these little guys right here. Now, the notes that I got from Paul was that it's a green background with monochrome, or the grayish kind of tree with the grayish creature, okay, and the red flowers on the creature. So I just made a new layer. Grab my brush here. I'm going to paint the creature gray again. Okay, and pretty much when this is all done, I'm going to fast forward in time a little bit here, and we're going to take a look at the actual thing that I did. So here is the gray, right? Here is the color stage. After that, added in some trees, some distractions in the background here, and started to bring in more and more values. Okay, until we have something more like this. Now it's time to bring the creatures back in, the little creatures back in. So, fast forwarding into time a little bit more, I'm going to show you the progression of this painting. Okay, so first we were at this point adding in more contrast and more darks, more lights, some texture there. And at this point, the next phase of this is that I want to hand in something that has brought the painting even further, as well as incorporated the notes that he said. So here's the development of the creature itself, the main guy. And here you can see the creatures, the little creatures getting blocked in. At first, they would have looked more like this. And once I have a general idea of placement, I tone down my block in. This is something that I'll eventually just totally dismiss and turn off the visibility of this layer. This helps me set positioning for things. And at this point, you can see that if I go like this, a lot of these creatures look like the same kind of size, which I do not plan on having them be the same kinds of creatures, all looking at the antlers here. Part of the idea is that because it looks like the flowers on the antlers are the only flowers in the whole entire forest that have bloomed these beautiful red or magenta rudderless tree flowers, it attracts all sorts of different creatures to it. Okay, but this is just for placement right now. And here is the development of the little creatures. Okay, there's some flowers right there. And there you can see, let's zoom in a little bit more. There you can start to see a bit more detail as before. Here's after. Better sizing, things like that. Still quite general. Hasn't been fully developed here yet, but it is getting there. The color stage really takes it quite a bit further. I try to look at the silhouettes, try to get inspired by them, and flesh them out. You can see that I've done a lot of detailing within this step, and that's only because they're small. At this point, the things I'm painting are so small, it's easy to go further with it. Okay, you can see on the top here, a couple of these guys get developed as well. Then from here, you can see I've blocked in the painting a bit. And what is this one right here? What is this layer right here? Let's take a look. You can see as I'm taking all these layers down, it pretty much didn't do anything to the actual painting. Okay, this layer right here was made by doing this. If I press Control A, that means I'm selecting the whole entire image. Okay, if I press Control Shift C, now if you are on a Mac, then that means you replace Control with the Command key. Okay, if I press Control Shift C on a PC, and then I press Control V for paste, then you can see I have copy and pasted everything within that selection I made. The combination of all these different layers. Okay, and then what I did was I selected just the painting because it copied the black border as well. Okay, and then I press Control Shift Alt L, which is auto contrast, or you can go up to Image, Adjustments, and you go to sorry, not adjustments, you go right here, auto contrast. I always use the shortcut. And what auto contrast does is it will spread out all the values within that painting. Okay, so for example, if I went Control L for levels, this little diagram here, this little graph here shows all the different values within my painting. As you can see, there is no white values. The values that appear the most are right here, and that's pretty much 30%, or sorry, 70% black, something like that. And it doesn't go all the way to black either. Okay, so the values start right over here and right over here. Okay, watch what happens when I press auto contrast. Now let's go to levels. You can see that all the values have been stretched all the way to the ends. Okay, so really it adds values to your painting, auto contrast. And what I like to do with that is after I painted it for a bit, I'll do the auto contrast, and then I'll make sure that it doesn't go to 100% black. You know, I don't like to do paintings that go from 100% white to 100% black. It's just too much contrast, and it just tends to look overexposed to me. Okay, so then right here, this is a curves adjustment layer. So how this works is I went to adjustment layers, I went to curves over here, and this graph right here, it represents all the different values, again, within this painting. So say I want to take these values are the values that are in the painting right now. These are the values that you want them to be. So for example, in this scale, 50% gray is right here, right? This is black, this is white, 50% gray is right here. So you go up this line until you hit this line right here. And this point right here is 50% gray. And what you want to do is, I want to say that, okay, 50% gray will now turn into 30% gray, right? So 50% gray right here, when you line it up to the side, only becomes 30% gray. And all the other values will change accordingly. The extreme values, the white and the black, you can see that they stayed the same. And this is a very nice way to be able to add values to your painting. Now, of course, I don't want the adjustments to go all over this painting. I just want it to go in certain sections. So I inverse my layer mask. Okay, layer mask works with alpha channels. Whatever is black in my layer mask, I will not be able to see the effects of my adjustment layer. Wherever I do want to see the effects of my adjustment layer, I will paint in white to reveal the effects of my adjustment layer. So I can do this, I could paint in white where I want things to become lighter. Now the advantage of this is that if I'm painting over something like that has stripes and I don't want to paint all those details again, I'm using an adjustment layer, and what it's doing is it's actually just showing the lighter version of this painting and not actually painting new colors. Right, so you're not going to cover anything. You can see this is a perfect example right here of how these adjustment layers can be very, very useful. Um, say I don't want to paint in all these extra stripes again. I'm just using my adjustment layer. I paint right over top, and it's just revealing the lighter version of this creature, which is very, very useful. Okay, and this is the next thing that I hand in for review. Okay, so after I handed in this version, I got back notes, which is perfectly normal. This is a step that will be repeated over and over again, sometimes by the client, sometimes by myself. And after completing Paul's first batch of notes, I was asked to change the color scheme. Revisions are a very common thing, even though I did the color scheme that he asked for. A lot of times it really takes doing it to see if we want it, right? And I definitely agreed with him. The color scheme needed to change. Uh, Revisions are, like I said, it's a very common thing in this line of work. So it's important to remember that this is a team effort to come up with something that reflects both the client's vision as well as your own. This is not all about me. This is all about uh, creating something that the client wanted, not what I think is some amazing idea. Hopefully, it will be both, right? In this case, I really do feel like it was something that turned out uh, to my satisfaction. Okay, so what were the revisions? Well, he was saying, which I totally agree with, it's a little too busy in the background. Background needs to change. It's a little too boring in the foreground. The foreground needs to change. The eyes feel a little dead by having the eyeballs all black here. And the trees having them kind of gray, not really working, a little too boring. Okay, so this is what happened. This was the next version. You can see that the tension is brought onto the flowers a lot more here. Here's before, right? Here's after. Now, why is there a lot more attention brought to the flowers as well as the creature here? Well, you can see the values in the background. Take a look from light to dark and how they are spread out, and the values of the foreground, light to dark, and how they're spread out. Okay, we look at this, and you can see that the background has been toned down in contrast. It's actually quite dark in the background now, which will bring a lot more attention to the lights, the light areas in the foreground. And behind the flowers here, on the antlers, it's quite dark. I made it quite dark on purpose because not only do the hues have great amounts of contrast from the greenish hue there to the magenta pinkish hue in the foreground, but also the value, the lightness and the darkness of the foreground versus the background, it's accentuated, right? So more attention is brought to this foreground here because of contrast, which I thought was looking pretty good. And the tree itself, we made it a bit more exciting here by putting on some vegetation that is growing off of the tree. You can see, if I really zoom in, you can see that I've clone stamped from a photo of some vegetation, just some random thing. I just clone stamped a bunch of it and I painted on top of it, so it's a nice little combination. It gets the idea going quite quickly, and this way my editor Paul can take a look at it and see the idea that I'm pitching to him. Now here's a good tip about handing in your painting to get reviewed. If I can, I try to give myself a day away from the painting, a full day away from the painting, and look at it again before handing it back in. This will give me a fresh perspective, which is important in maintaining high quality work. Okay, there have been a few times in the past where I had to do a rush job to meet a deadline and handed in the art after working non-stop the entire day. By that time, I'm usually pretty tired and I've been looking at my paintings for far too long. So I want to avoid that as much as possible and give myself some time to just empty out my brain so I look at it again with fresh eyes. And now that I have my creatures, my little creatures quite developed, it's time to refine the ideas of them a bit more, because some of them are kind of general. I don't really like this blue dragon thing here. It just seems a little not that memorable. And this guy up here looks a little odd too. Looks a little too cartoony, so I want to watch out about that. Same thing with this guy. And this one I haven't even really thought about yet. Okay, but realism comes from subtleties. That's just general. Realism comes from subtleties. How to make something feel real? Have some great subtleties in there. Not just in the little technical details of the painting, like highlighting the tiny claws on the creature, but the idea itself. So when coming up with imaginative creatures, it's important to pay attention to the function. How does it move? How does it eat? Etc. Ask yourself, does it belong in the environment? And what emotions do you want to evoke when somebody looks at it? So how did these creatures actually move around and get up on this tree? This one, you can tell that moves a certain way. This one has wings. This one also has wings. This one has a tail that wraps around with a bunch of legs, so on and so forth. So you want to make sure that they all look like they could live in these trees, that they belong in these trees, which hopefully it does. So once I come up with the ideas for each of these creatures and have done loose sketches of each, which I feel like these are definitely good enough to call loose, then it's time for me to gather reference images. The more the better. That might help me, to inspire me later on. This is, as the direction of your creature becomes clearer, you can start eliminating reference images that are no longer of use. Now, one of the things that I do that is so small but really does make a big difference is that I will place the reference images around my painting, which means I'll expand my painting a whole bunch, right? And I just made the extra parts all black, okay? And I put the reference images around. Now, why is this? Because usually what people might do is they're working on a painting, they have a bunch of reference, they start opening up all these little windows of all these little different references, and which is fine, which is great to work with. But then if you had to save and close the image and close Photoshop or whatever, when you reopen it, you need to search out 20 of those reference images again, and it just takes too long. This way you can just have your reference on the same file as the painting that you're working on. And you know how before I went up to Window, Arrange, New Window, I made a smaller version of my painting so I could look at. You can also open up another window strictly for reference, right? So you can do this, and you can go to New Window, right? And you could pull this off and just zoom in into whatever reference you want to look at a little bit closer. You know, you could put that right there. And over here, then you can just really zoom in. Now let's talk about the reference a little bit. It is very important to say the way that I use reference. You know, in my line of work, there's a lot of times where you're painting something in a particular pose. They want you to paint in a particular pose, a particular action or whatever that you cannot find reference for. So for me, reference is just loose inspiration. You can look at all these different animals that I painted, and you can look at the reference as well, and you can see that the reference doesn't actually match up with the creature at all. It's more like things that I figure might inspire me. For example, I like this owl, how there's parts of this owl here that kind of resemble the texture of the wood, right? So in my painting, you can see that there's similar type feeling details here on the chest as well. So it's very loosely based off of the references, but I do use references. It's just that I use them to inspire, usually. And the other great thing about this is that you can have a whole pile of references for perhaps just the middle creature, and then you can have another set of references for something else. Okay, so there you go with that. And then the other thing I wanted to talk about next was to clean up, keep your work clean. If you look at this, I have so many different elements in this painting. If I wasn't careful, I would probably have 4 times as many layers here. This is already a lot more layers than I'm used to usually. You know, for workshop demonstration purposes, I try to keep as many of my layers as possible so I can turn them on and off as we go through it, which might be kind of interesting for you to see as well. Okay, but keep your work clean. When working on assignments with other people involved, it's important to keep your layers clean. What I mean by this mostly is that even though I do have a lot of layers here, these layers are there for particular reasons, and I try to keep my different elements separated by different layers. So in other words, I do not paint on this creature in the foreground and then paint in the background on the same layer. right? I try to keep them on separate layers, the different elements. This way, if I do have any revisions, it's very easy for me to, adjust. This simple habit will save you lots of headaches when you have to make revisions, especially to elements that have complex or semi-transparent silhouettes. Imagine you had to paint uh, these antlers over and over again, making adjustments all the time because these antlers, parts of the antlers are scattered throughout all these different layers here. That wouldn't work out too well. So this is the next step of the painting process here. We have our references, and I try to develop these characters even further. Okay, let's zoom in a little bit, take a look at where we went from here. Now you can also see in the background has been changed to something a lot more warmer, right? That was a few steps ago. And after that step, it became dark green, and now we changed it to orange. Okay, so after this step, I was saying I also didn't like that little blue dragon, so I changed it to something more like some weird kind of dragon-ish, kind of snail-ish kind of thing, which I thought would be a lot more interesting. Okay, developed a little bit further. Could zoom in here a little bit more. Okay, developed a little bit further. Added in some rim light happening. And start to detail some things out. Now you can also see the development of some of these other creatures here. Like this creature, for example. Let's take a real close look. There's before, and I was saying that it looked a little too cartoony, so put some more anatomical sophistication into the head here. Inspired by this painting right here, this ugly little baby bird. Still not very close to the final thing, but like I said, I try to use reference as inspiration only. Okay, we go a little bit further. You can see the hairs on the antlers starting to develop. I wanted the flowers to actually be made out of hair so that they aren't actual flowers. And then just added in the details. Now, lighting the scene. This scene is quite complex. There's a lot of different elements in here. How do you keep everything consistent? It's with this right here, this little arrow, okay? Very simple thing to do. You can notice that the arrow is not just a two-dimensional arrow, sorry. This arrow is drawn three-dimensionally. And that way I can really kind of imagine where the light is coming from. Okay, and I lock this arrow layer. That way I won't paint on it by accident, which has happened many times in the past. And you can just move it around wherever you want to whichever section you're painting, and then lock it again. Okay, you could turn it on and off. It helps to keep everything consistent. I usually, keep the arrows on a completely separate layer from everything else. Okay, and as I start detailing all these creatures out, it was very important for me to really think about the textures. Really think heavily about these textures. Try to vary up the textures. You know, just like choosing the clothes that you wear, it's great to vary up the textures. You don't want to have jeans in denim all over, you know, that kind of thing. Denim hat with a denim jacket with a denim shirt with a denim pants. Might look a little plain or a bit strange. Think about how the different elements of the painting differ uh, in in texture from each other. You know, so how do all these little elements, especially these creatures, how do they differ from each other in texture? Some are smooth, some are translucent, some are a little bit furry, some are a bit shiny, this and that. An assortment, you know, it really plays to the whole idea that all sorts of different species of creatures are attracted by the flowery antlers on the main creature. Okay, color decisions. In this case, Paul gave me certain colors to work with, so that simplified my color decisions. Otherwise, it helps to have a basic color scheme in mind going into this image. You know, it was very easy for me because he just directed me and said, okay, the background, let's make it more orange, and you know, so on and so forth. Sometimes it is up to you. It is up to me. It's up to the artist. So most color choices I would make involve adding or taking away contrast, which is similar to my thinking when it comes to values. So in other words, when I'm choosing colors, I'm thinking about, well, how much contrast do I want to build by changing these colors, right? So, for example, um, if I want more attention to be attracted to, say, this guy down here, I might just do something like this. I might just go to, well, we could create a layer right here. Let's set it to color. Let's set that to color. Okay. Okay, and then let's back this up a little bit more. Let's actually erase the belly part. You know, I might change it to something that will stand out quite a bit more. All depends on how much do I want the viewer to be attracted to that particular part of the painting. If I want it to be attracted a lot, then I will add a lot of contrast. But right now I feel like this creature is bringing too much attention, right? Because this creature is, it's in very plain view. It's not being obstructed by anything which would take away attention from this creature. And because it's really in plain view, it's right very close to the main focal point of this painting, it is attracting a lot of attention already. Right? So I kept it green, kept it a little bit more camouflaged so it doesn't overpower all the other more important points. Okay, the rim lighting, you can see that there has been this warm light here, which I try to keep it more like rim light. Okay, you can see that part being put in. Now, that's because there was a request to add a strong warm light to the image in order to bring out the foreground a bit. Often this is achieved by adding another light or a stronger light to the scene. In this case, I put in the warm light. I approach lighting in a painting like lighting in the scene of a movie. I ask myself, what needs to be in shadow? What needs to be in light? How much light should there be? Then I think of what reasons to add the lights where I want them to be. Because you can't just add in lights, um, if they don't make sense. Right? It'll look more artificial. So in this case, try to keep the feeling of this more like it's starting, the sun is starting to set or whatever, and it's nice warm light, and it's coming through the trees, coming from up above still. If I just made some warm light, on these creatures over here, and didn't have warm light in the background, had cool light in the background, even though that might be some great contrast, it might not look too good because it's not consistent. And that's what I mean by you want to find reasons to add in the lights where you want them to be. And the very last part I want to kind of just go over with you guys is the actual detailing of this painting. I want to show you something about the image size. Okay, the actual image size that it should be 300 millimeters by 222 millimeters. Okay, right now it's 376 by 280 something, and that's done for a reason. I like to paint at a larger size than what the final size is going to be. As long as my computer doesn't lag, I try to paint as big as possible. When I do illustrations that require a finished look, I often work with the painting zoomed in at 100%, so that I can inspect the work in all its detail. So in other words, I will work at this level and just cruise along the whole entire painting, working over everything to make sure that everything is looking quite nicely. I also added in this little insect wing in its mouth it's kind of like the cherry on top, right? It adds the humor. It shows the intent of the creature. I added in a bit of a snarl. So overall the creature looks kind of cute, and then you go, oh, but it's kind of gruesome at the same time, which is something that I always love to play with. Okay, and that's pretty much it. After this, I just, I would resize the image to the size that they want exactly, and then I'm pretty good. One last thing was, in the very beginning of the tutorial, I was mentioning the very first notes that I got from Paul, the art editor at ImagineFX, is that we could possibly have parts of the image overlapping some of this text and stuff. So he thought it would be a great idea to add a creature here that would be eating the S in creature design. And that's what I have right here in this little folder here. Okay, so it looks like this. It's pretty much a baby version of this guy. However, I felt like I needed to change the color a bit more so that it would be colorful enough to stand out when we have all this other stuff, all this other text and everything there on the image. Okay, so hopefully it does. and hopefully I did a good job. And that's pretty much it. So thank you very much for sticking around and seeing a bit of how I do things and the questions that I will ask myself and the procedure in which I will work with my clients to come up with something that is true to their vision, as well as something where I've contributed my own ideas to, and overall, something where everybody is happy and satisfied. If you'd like to learn more about digital painting or anything like this, please check out my online school, schoolism.com. Tons of well-known professional artists that paint and draw on top of the students' works to give a hands-on approach to teaching every student specifically to their own skill levels. Thank you very much for watching. This is Bobby Chiu signing off. Take care, everybody.
Join me on schoolism.com for art classes where you'll learn from known professional artists. Watch the lessons, do the assignments, hand in your assignment to the site, and in a few days you would receive a new video where you have your assignment on screen. Your teacher would then paint and draw on top of your assignment, designing their teaching towards your specific skill level. You can watch the videos on your own time. You can do the assignments on your own time. You have a due date. That's it. You have access to the videos 24/7, and the best thing of all is that you can ask the teacher any questions that you want. Also, you get to watch everybody else's video critiques as well, because they'll be asking all sorts of different questions that totally pertain to you. It's just that you never thought of asking. If you'd like to find out more, you can visit us at schoolism.com and sign up for a class today.